Little girl found a wounded German shepherd under the porch. What happened next will melt your heart. It was the kind of storm that didn't ask permission. It didn't roll in gently or whisper warnings. It crashed through the sky like something angry had been let loose. The wind howled like a wild animal, thrashing against the trees, and the rain fell sideways, sharp and unforgiving. The windows of the little farmhouse rattled in their frames, and thunder shook the walls like a distant explosion. Everyone in the house was asleep. Everyone except for Emily. She was only 8 years old, tucked beneath a heavy quilt that smelled faintly of her mother's soap and warm summer nights. Her little fingers clutched the ears of her stuffed elephant, the one with the stitched-up leg and missing button eye. But even with him by her side, Emily couldn't sleep. Something wasn't right. She wasn't scared of the storm, not really. She liked the sound of rain on the roof, the flashes of light through her curtains. But tonight, something else stirred beneath the noise. It was faint at first, almost nothing. A sound hidden beneath the wind and thunder. A whimper. She froze, sat up, tilted her head. There it was again, soft, pained, and so small that it almost didn't feel real. But it was real. She knew it. Emily slid out of bed as quietly as she could, her bare feet pressing into the cold wooden floor. She crept through the hallway, careful not to wake her parents. The old farmhouse creaked with every step, like it was trying to give her away. But she moved like a whisper. In the kitchen, she reached for the flashlight her mom kept by the window for power outages. It felt heavy in her hand. The storm roared louder as she unlocked the back door. When she stepped outside, the wind nearly knocked her over. Rain stung her cheeks, soaking her nightgown in seconds. The flashlight's beam danced wildly in the dark, barely cutting through the rain. She stepped onto the porch, her heart thudding in her chest. Then she heard it again, closer this time. A soft whimper, trembling beneath the floorboards. Emily crouched low, bringing the flashlight down with her. Her hair clung to her face, her fingers slipping on the wet wood. She aimed the light under the porch and stopped breathing. Two eyes stared back at her. Not glowing, not angry, just wide and wet and scared. They belonged to something large, something curled up tightly in the shadows, trying to disappear. A dog. No, not just any dog. A German shepherd. He didn't growl, didn't bark. He didn't move at all, except for a small twitch in one ear. His body was trembling, soaked through, and bleeding from one leg. His fur was matted with mud and filth. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The rain poured around them, the thunder cracking above, but in that tiny space under the porch, there was a stillness, like time had paused to watch. Emily's heart pounded in her ears. She didn't feel afraid. Not exactly. What she felt was something closer to the pull. A deep, quiet ache that came from his eyes. An understanding she couldn't explain. She whispered, "It's okay." The dog flinched but didn't run. She didn't know what to do. She wanted to crawl under there and hug him, but she remembered what her dad always said, never touch a wounded animal, no matter how sad it looks. So instead, she turned and ran back inside. She came back moments later, her arms full, a blanket, a piece of leftover chicken, and an old towel. She dropped to her knees and pushed the chicken toward him slowly, inch by inch. The dog sniffed the air. Then, with trembling effort, he reached out and gently took the meat from her hand. Their eyes locked again, and for the first time, his tail gave a tiny, almost invisible wag. Emily smiled. "I'm gonna call you Shadow," she whispered. He didn't move, but he didn't look away either. And so, in the middle of the storm, under an old wooden porch in the middle of nowhere, a wounded dog and a quiet little girl sat in silence. Not the kind of silence that's empty, the kind that holds something sacred, something beginning. The rain kept falling like the sky itself had cracked open, And somewhere beneath that storm, a little girl was kneeling on a porch, eyes wide, heart pounding. Emily had seen many things in her 8 short years, but never anything like the pair of eyes staring back at her now. They weren't glowing or monstrous like in her bedtime stories. No, these eyes were soft, and full of something she didn't quite have words for, something like pain, something like begging. Beneath the old wooden porch, where spiders spun their webs and the wind rarely reached, a wounded German shepherd lay motionless. He was bigger than she expected. His fur was wet, clumped with mud, and darkened with blood in places. One of his legs looked twisted, and his breathing was uneven, like every breath was an effort. But still, he didn't move away. He just watched her, still and silent. Emily's hand trembled as she held the flashlight, its weak beam barely slicing through the rain. She didn't know what to do. Her first feeling was fear, not of the dog, but of the hurt in his eyes. She had never seen an animal like that before. He looked like someone who had been running for a long time and had finally run out of places to go. She whispered, "Hey," though her voice was nearly drowned by the storm. The dog didn't react, just blinked once, slowly, like he was too tired for fear. That was all Emily needed. She turned and ran back into the house, trying not to make the floorboards creak as she tiptoed through the kitchen. She opened the fridge as quietly as she could and grabbed a plate of leftover roast chicken. It was supposed to be tomorrow's lunch, but that didn't matter now. She wrapped it in a napkin and clutched it to her chest like it was gold. On the way to the back door, she snatched a towel from the laundry pile and the old wool blanket her father kept on his recliner. She wasn't sure if she was allowed to take it, but something told her she'd be forgiven. Outside again, the cold hit her harder this time, but she didn't stop. She dropped to her knees and crawled close to the edge of the porch, the chicken balanced on her lap. The flashlight wobbled in her hand as she reached forward, slowly laying a piece of meat near the opening. The smell drifted through the rain. For a long time, the dog didn't move. And then he did. Just barely. He didn't stand or crawl. He dragged himself an inch closer. His nose twitched. His eyes stayed on Emily, cautious but curious. Then, gently, he leaned forward and took the piece of chicken between his teeth. He didn't gobble it. He chewed slowly, as if savoring not just the taste, but the moment. Emily placed another piece down, this one a little closer to her hand. Again, the dog reached forward and took it, still watching her like she was something strange, something different from the people he'd known before. "I'm going to call you Shadow," she whispered. The dog gave no sign of understanding, but something in the way his ears twitched made her think he heard her. Maybe even accepted the name. She reached forward just a little more, holding out the blanket. But the moment her fingers touched the wood near him, he flinched. His body jerked like he was bracing for a hit. Emily's heart cracked a little. She pulled her hand back slowly. "I'm not gonna hurt you," she said gently. "I promise." She slid the blanket forward, inch by inch, until it was close enough for him to reach if he wanted. Then she backed away and just sat there, cross-legged on the porch, rain soaking her hair and her clothes, watching him in silence. The dog didn't come forward again, but he didn't retreat either. He laid his head down on the edge of the wood, still facing her. His eyes began to close, heavy with exhaustion. She could hear his slow, ragged breathing even over the storm. She stayed with him until her fingers went numb, until the flashlight began to dim. Then, with a whisper so soft the wind nearly carried it away, she said, "Good night, Shadow." When she finally climbed back into bed, her window fogged with rain and her hair damp against her pillow, Emily didn't feel afraid of the storm anymore. She stared out at the dark yard, at the porch, at the place where Shadow now slept. She couldn't see him, but she knew he was there. Alone, but not forgotten. And something inside her knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. Emily hadn't slept much after returning to bed. Every few minutes, she'd peek through the window, pressing her face against the cold glass just to see if he was still there. And he was. Curled up under the porch, motionless, quiet, but there. Shadow hadn't run, hadn't disappeared into the woods like a dream. He was real and he'd stayed. That meant something. So at the first hint of morning light, Emily was already out of bed, her little hands rubbing sleep from her eyes as she tiptoed through the house. The floorboards creaked beneath her socks, and the hallway was still wrapped in that sleepy hush before parents wake. She crept into the kitchen and opened the fridge slowly, wincing when the suction popped. She grabbed the leftover eggs from yesterday, careful not to spill, and reached for the last slice of bread, now slightly hard at the edges. Wrapping the food in a napkin and grabbing a bowl for water, she turned, only to stop cold. Her mother was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes tired but sharp. "Emily," she said, voice low, "why are you sneaking around with food?" There was no anger in the voice yet, just confusion laced with concern. Emily's heart pounded. Her mouth went dry. For a second, she thought about lying, about saying she was feeding the birds or playing tea party. But lies didn't sit well in her chest. So she took a breath, looked up at her mother, and said, "There's a dog. Under the porch. He's hurt." The pause that followed felt like a year. Her mother blinked slowly, trying to process the words. "What do you mean, a dog?" "A big one. A German shepherd, I think," Emily said. "He didn't bite or bark. He just looked at me. He's bleeding. I fed him last night. He didn't run." For a moment, her mother just stared. Then quietly she said, "Show me." They stepped onto the porch together, the early morning air still damp from the storm. Emily knelt beside the boards and whispered, "Shadow." It was the first time she said his name aloud in front of someone else. And somehow it still felt right. Slowly, beneath the porch, movement. Rustle. Then, two familiar brown eyes appeared in the shadows. Her mother gasped softly when she saw him. His fur was matted, legs stained with dried blood, ribs faintly visible beneath his skin. But he didn't growl. He didn't even flinch. He just looked at them, tired and still, like he didn't have the energy left to fear. "Oh, sweet boy," her mother murmured, crouching down beside Emily. "What happened to you?" Emily whispered, "Can we keep him?" Her mother hesitated, lips pressed in a thin line. "I don't know, honey. He's hurt. We need to call someone." "But just for today?" Emily begged. "He can stay here just for one day. Please." Before her mother could answer, the porch door creaked again, and a heavier pair of footsteps came out behind them. Emily's father stood with a coffee mug in one hand, his expression unreadable. "What's going on?" he asked. Her mother straightened slowly. "Emily found a dog. He's under the porch. He's injured." Jack came closer, squinting toward the shadows. And the moment he spotted the shepherd, his whole body changed. Tensed. "That's a German shepherd," he said, voice suddenly cold. "We're not keeping that." Emily stood up quickly, facing him. "But Dad, he's not dangerous. He didn't even move when I touched the blanket. He let me feed him." Jack's eyes never left the dog. His jaw clenched. "You don't know these dogs. They're unpredictable, especially when they're hurt." Her mother touched his arm. "Jack, no," he said firmly. "I've seen what they can do. In the army, one of them turned on a handler, ripped half his face off." His voice cracked slightly at the edge. "I'm not putting Emily near that." But Emily wouldn't back down. Her fists were balled at her sides, her voice trembling. "Please, Dad. Just for tonight. One night. He has nowhere to go. He's not like that. He's not mean. He's just broken." For a moment, silence. Just the quiet sound of Shadow's breath beneath the porch. Then Jack sighed, not the angry kind, but the tired, haunted kind. He looked at his daughter, at her soaking wet socks and pleading eyes. He looked at the dog, who hadn't made a sound. And finally he spoke. One night, he stays outside. Tomorrow we call the vet. Emily rushed forward and hugged him tightly around the middle. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, thank you. And from beneath the porch, a soft thump, Shadow's tail, slow and heavy, tapping the dirt once before going still again. The morning sun came gently, as if it, too, was afraid of disturbing what the night had left behind. It rose quietly over the trees, casting soft gold across the grass and turning the puddles into mirrors. In the warmth of that light, the house began to stir, a coffee pot gurgling, birds testing their voices again, and inside the little kitchen, Emily sat at the table with a plate of toast she hadn't touched. Her eyes weren't on the food. They were on the back door. She kept listening for movement beneath the porch. A bark, a shuffle, anything. But there was only silence. When her mother turned away to wash the dishes, Emily grabbed the book she'd been reading before the storm, a worn-out paperback about animals who could talk, and tiptoed toward the door. Outside, the grass was still wet, dew clinging to her shoes as she made her way around the porch. She didn't call out. She didn't say his name. She just knelt down and waited. And after a few long moments, she saw the brown eyes again. Watching. Not hiding. Not anymore. Just watching. She sat cross-legged a few feet from the porch's edge, laid the book in her lap, and began to read aloud. Her voice was quiet at first, uncertain, but steady. It was a simple story, but Emily didn't care about the plot. She just wanted Shadow to hear her voice. Maybe he'd remember it from last night. Maybe it made her feel real to him. The dog didn't move, but he didn't look away either. For nearly an hour, Emily stayed there, reading and pausing, reading and glancing up, until the story came to an end. Then she placed a small plate near the edge, scrambled eggs and cut up turkey slices her mother had allowed her to take. No sudden movements. No reaching out. Just a gentle push forward and her hands retreating again. Shadow sniffed cautiously, then crawled forward just enough to eat. His body moved stiffly, like he hurt all over. But he ate. Every bite. Emily smiled. She tried not to look directly at his wounds, but they were hard to ignore up close. There were old scars along his ribs, thin lines where fur had stopped growing. One of his ears was torn at the edge, just barely. Around his neck, she noticed the faint indent of a collar long removed, not clean, not fresh, but pressed deep into the skin, like it had once been too tight for too long. Whoever had owned him before hadn't loved him the way dogs are meant to be loved. That much was clear. She laid the book beside her and rested her chin on her knees. "You're not just a dog, are you?" she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "You're like a person, only quieter." Shadow didn't blink, just kept watching. And somehow, Emily felt like he understood. Not the words, maybe, but the feeling. By midday, the sun had dried most of the ground, and the wind had lost its bite. Emily came out again with fresh water and another towel, this time sitting even closer. She didn't speak this time. She just sat. She drew little circles in the dirt with a stick and hummed a song her mother used to sing while doing the laundry. The kind with no words, just soft, gentle notes that floated around them. And then, something changed. Shadow shifted. Not away, but toward her. It was small, barely an inch. But Emily noticed. She froze, holding her breath. Slowly, her hand inched forward, just a little, palm up, fingers loose. And then, the moment. Shadow leaned his head forward, hesitated, then pressed his nose against her fingertips. It wasn't a lick. It wasn't eager. It was more like a question. A cautious, hopeful question. Emily smiled, her eyes stinging for reasons she didn't fully understand. She let her fingers brush his cheek, careful not to touch anywhere near the wounds. His fur was coarse, damp, but warm. Alive. "You're not so scary," she whispered. Shadow let out the softest sigh and laid his head back down, this time facing her directly. His eyes were still heavy, but they no longer looked guarded. Just tired. Deeply tired. And then, without warning, his tail thumped once against the wood. Not a wag, not quite, but enough to make Emily laugh softly through her nose, a sound that made Shadow's ears twitch just slightly. She leaned back and crossed her arms around her knees again. "You can stay as long as you want," she said. "I'll tell Daddy that." The dog didn't move, but he didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. The day moved quietly after that, as if the storm had taken all the noise with it when it left. Shadow stayed under the porch, but his eyes followed Emily now, not with fear, but with a gentle, cautious trust. Every time she came outside with a bowl of food or a few pages of her book, his tail would give that little soft thump on the ground, not excited, but present. She spoke to him the way she would speak to a shy friend, with patience, kindness, and just enough silence in between to let him feel safe. By early evening, the golden hour had arrived, and the whole sky glowed a soft amber. Emily sat on the windowsill of her room, elbows resting on the edge, staring down at the yard where long shadows stretched across the grass. Her book sat closed in her lap, unread. Her thoughts were with Shadow, still under the porch, curled up on the blanket, one ear always listening, one eye always open. She was beginning to wonder who he had been before this. What kind of life he had come from. No ordinary dog ends up this way. Not with scars like that. Not with silence so heavy. It was in the middle of that quiet thought that something changed. A faint noise in the distance, the hum of a vehicle, slow and steady. Emily looked up and narrowed her eyes as the sound grew louder. Then she saw it. A truck. Old, dusty, with a dented front and cracked side mirror, crawling slowly down the dirt road in front of their house. She felt it immediately, that cold pinch in her chest. The kind of chill that doesn't come from the air. The truck didn't roll past like most others did. It slowed to a near stop just beyond their mailbox. The driver's window was rolled halfway down. Emily couldn't see much at first, just the outline of a man's head, a thick arm resting against the glass. But what she could see clearly was where he was looking. Not at the house. Not at the road. At the porch. At Shadow. Emily didn't move. She stayed frozen in the window, her breath caught somewhere between her ribs. The man didn't get out. Didn't wave. Just stared. And then, just as suddenly, he hit the gas and the truck sped off, kicking up a trail of dust behind it. Emily leapt from the window and ran downstairs. "Mom," she called, breathless. There was a truck, some guy. He was looking at the porch. Her mother turned from the kitchen, drying her hands with a towel. "What are you talking about?" Emily spoke fast, tumbling over her words. There was a man in a beat-up truck, and he slowed down. He didn't stop, but he looked straight at Shadow. He didn't wave or anything. Then he sped off. Her mother blinked, processing, and then she walked quickly to the front door, pulling it open and stepping out. The road was empty now, the air still. "You're sure?" she asked. Emily nodded. He wasn't just passing by. He was watching. Her mother's face tightened, not scared, but alert. She reached into her back pocket and pulled out her phone. "We're calling the vet," she said. "Right now." Emily followed her into the living room and sat quietly on the couch as her mother explained the situation. A wounded stray dog, signs of abuse, and now a strange man possibly tracking him. The voice on the other end was calm but serious. They agreed to have a mobile vet come by in the morning, just to evaluate Shadow without moving him. And they suggested one more thing. Check the online missing pet databases. Emily was already ahead of them. She opened her tablet and began scrolling through local and regional lost dog listings. She typed in German Shepherd and set the range to 60 miles. Dozens of photos popped up. Some old, some recent. Some with tearful descriptions, others with just a phone number. But none of them looked like Shadow. Then she tried something else. She typed German Shepherd missing, possible abuse into a search bar. She scrolled through rescue forums, news articles, and Facebook pages. It was like opening a door to a different world, a darker one. Stories of dogs found tied to trees, of illegal breeding, neglect, even fighting rings. And then she found a thread. It was dated just a week ago. 3 dogs recovered from suspected fighting ring in Northern County. One still missing, believed to have escaped the property before officers arrived. Male German Shepherd, roughly 5 years old. Large scar above left leg. Extremely timid. May not respond to name. Approach with care. Emily stared at the post. Her eyes slowly drifted toward the window, toward the porch where Shadow lay still, his head barely visible under the steps. A scar above the left leg. Timid. Silent. Missing. She read the post again. And again. Her voice was quiet when she finally said, "Mom, I think Shadow's running from something." Her mother looked up. "What do you mean?" Emily turned the tablet around and showed her the article. Her mother's eyes scanned the screen. Her expression changed, from worry to something deeper. Something like grief. They both turned to the window together. Outside, Shadow lay with his eyes half closed, but they could see the twitch in his ears, like he knew he was being talked about. Like he was always listening now. Emily whispered, "What did they do to you?" But Shadow didn't move. He didn't have to. There was something written in his silence, something no words could fully explain. It wasn't just that he'd been through pain. It was that he had survived something dark and never expected to be found. And now, maybe someone wanted him back, for all the wrong reasons. Emily leaned her forehead against the glass, a whisper escaping her lips before she even realized she'd said it. "We're not letting them take you." The next morning arrived with a hush. The wind had settled, the sky was a soft gray, and everything felt heavy, like the world was still deciding what kind of day it wanted to be. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her chin resting in her palm, eyes flicking between the front door and the clock. She hadn't even touched the cereal her mother had poured for her. Outside, under the porch, Shadow still lay curled in the same spot, a little less guarded now, but still unmoving, like he was afraid the earth itself might betray him if he dared to relax. At exactly 9 o'clock, a white van pulled up onto the gravel driveway. The words "Mobile Veterinary Services" were printed neatly across the side. Emily jumped up, nearly knocking over her chair. Her mother placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Let me talk to them first," she said. Emily nodded, even though every bone in her body wanted to be the first one out the door. The vet, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Martinez, stepped out holding a clipboard and a soft voice. She moved slowly, respectfully, as if approaching something sacred. Shadow lifted his head at the sound of her footsteps, but didn't growl. He simply watched. Emily noticed how his eyes had shifted. They weren't as wild anymore, but still full of that cautious quiet, like someone who knew safety was always temporary. Dr. Martinez knelt near the porch without reaching. "Hey, big guy," she said softly. "You've had quite a few days, haven't you?" She didn't touch him at first. Just spoke to him like he was human. Shadow didn't move, but he didn't pull away either. After a few minutes, she offered a piece of dried meat from her pocket. Slowly, Shadow stretched his neck forward and accepted it. Emily's heart thumped with hope. With her mother's help, they gently coaxed him out with food and calm words. It took time. Shadow's movements were stiff, and he kept pausing, looking back toward the porch like it had become his shield. But eventually, he stepped forward enough for Dr. Martinez to scan him with her handheld reader. A soft beep. Then silence. The vet looked at the screen. Her brow furrowed. "He's microchipped," she said slowly, "but it's been deactivated. Intentionally." Emily's mother looked confused. "What does that mean?" Dr. Martinez stood, her tone changing just slightly. "It means someone didn't want him traced. Usually, this only happens in cases where the dog was stolen or used for something illegal." Emily, who had been listening from a few feet away, felt her stomach twist. The vet stepped around and began gently checking Shadow's leg, running her fingers along the old scar tissue. "He's got markings consistent with trauma. See here, near his ribs? And these older wounds, they're not from accidents. These look like bite scars." Her voice was calm, but the meaning in her words cut deep. Emily's mother swallowed hard. "Dogfighting?" Dr. Martinez nodded. "Most likely. He's a survivor." Emily looked at Shadow, who had lowered his head again, eyes half closed, accepting the vet's hands without protest. He didn't look like a fighter. He looked like someone who had only ever wanted to run away. "I can't say what he's been through," the vet added gently, "but I can say this: he's not aggressive. Most dogs from those rings are completely shut down, or they lash out at everything. He's still open, still aware. That says a lot." As if to prove her point, the front door of the vet's van opened, and a small child, maybe 2, maybe 3, toddled down the steps, holding a half-eaten apple. A vet tech called after him, but the boy had already made his way toward the group, drawn to the big dog like children often are. Everyone froze. Emily's father had stepped out onto the porch just in time to see the child stumble toward Shadow. "Wait!" the vet tech called, but it was too late. The boy reached Shadow and held out the apple. Shadow blinked, lifted his head slowly, and leaned forward. He didn't take the apple. He didn't bark or pull away. He simply nudged the boy's hand gently with his nose, just once, and then looked away. The child giggled and sat down in the dirt beside him, completely unafraid. No one spoke. For a long moment they just watched. Emily's father, arms folded across his chest, said nothing. But something had changed in his face. His jaw was no longer tight. His eyes had softened just a little, enough to notice. Dr. Martinez cleared her throat and turned to Emily's parents. "Legally, without an owner to claim him, he needs to go through a shelter hold. It's a formality, just in case someone comes forward. After that, he's available for adoption." Emily stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Can he stay here?" she asked. "Just while he's healing?" The vet hesitated. "He would need care. Possibly medication. You'd need to be sure." "I am sure," Emily said louder now. "He's safe here. He needs quiet. He doesn't need cages again." Her father looked at her, then at Shadow, then back at Dr. Martinez. Finally he spoke. "We'll keep him for now, if that's allowed." The vet nodded. "I'll mark him as fostered. But you should know, people from those rings, if they recognize him, they might come looking." Emily's mother placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "Let them come," she said softly. "They won't take him again." Shadow, who had watched the entire exchange without a sound, finally stretched out his front legs and laid his head in the dirt. Not out of fear, out of something closer to peace. For the first time, maybe in his whole life, he had people standing for him. And somehow he knew it. The house was quiet that night, in the way homes often are after something important happens. Not silent, exactly. The soft hum of the refrigerator still pulsed in the background. The wind still rustled the trees just beyond the porch. But there was a hush in the air, as if the house itself was taking a breath, letting things settle. Shadow had eaten well for the first time in days. He was resting now, stretched out on a makeshift bed of blankets near the back door, no longer hiding beneath the porch but not quite inside either, halfway in, halfway out, like someone still learning what safety felt like. Emily sat cross-legged on the rug in the living room, her favorite book open in her lap but unread. Her eyes kept drifting toward Shadow, who was sleeping soundly for once, his body no longer coiled tight like a spring. Her mother was folding laundry in the corner, humming something soft and familiar. And her father, well, he was just sitting in his chair, staring into the dim light of the lamp like it held the answers to questions he hadn't asked in years. For a long time, he said nothing, just sipped his coffee and stared. Then, without looking up, he spoke. "You know," he said slowly, "I once had a dog like that." Emily's eyes widened, and she turned fully toward him. Her mother stopped folding laundry mid-shirt. "It was a long time ago," he continued. "Before you were born. Before your mother and I met. I was stationed overseas. Afghanistan. It was a rough time." His voice was different. Lord. Tired, but not in the way a man gets from lack of sleep. Tired like something inside had been carrying weight for too long. "There was this dog," he said. "Military working dog. Trained, sharp, loyal as anything I've ever seen. Name was Rex. Big, dark, just like Shadow. Only meaner when he had to be. He wasn't mine exactly, belonged to another unit, but we shared a lot of space. Dirt floors, tense, long nights." Emily leaned forward. "What happened to him?" Her father took a deep breath, his eyes far away now. "We were out on patrol one night. It was supposed to be routine, quiet, but nothing's ever really quiet out there. Something triggered, buried under the road. We never saw it coming." He paused. His fingers gripped the mug a little tighter. "The blast hit hard. Everyone went down. I was lucky somehow. Thrown, bruised, bleeding, but alive. I remember the ringing in my ears. The dust. The screaming. I couldn't move at first. Could barely see." He swallowed. Emily's mother walked over and sat beside him, silent, her hand resting on his arm. "And then I felt something tugging at my vest," he said. "At first I thought it was one of the guys, maybe trying to get me out. But it wasn't. It was Rex." His voice cracked just a little. "He was trying to drag me. Away from the fire. Away from the others. One paw was shredded, bleeding bad, but he still pulled. Got me behind a wall. Then he lay down next to me, and I swear to God, he stayed there, pressed up against my side, until the medics came hours later." Emily blinked back tears. "They said he saved my life," he whispered. "But I couldn't save his." The room was still. Shadow stirred in his sleep but didn't wake. "We had to evacuate. Rex was still alive, but barely. There was no room on the chopper. They promised they'd send help back for him. Said he'd be okay. But it never came. By the time they returned, he was gone." Emily's father looked down at his hands, now resting empty in his lap. "I never forgave myself for leaving him there. Not really. I know it wasn't my call, but still, he died alone. After everything he did for me, I wasn't there." His voice fell to almost a whisper. "And now, I see Shadow, and it's like I'm looking into the same eyes." Emily stood and walked over slowly. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arms around her father's middle and held him tight. For a moment, he stayed stiff, still that soldier inside him, still afraid to let the pain show. But then his arms came around her, and he held her too. "I think," he said softly, "that maybe I'm supposed to help this one. Maybe this time, I'm supposed to stay." From the back door, there was a sound. A soft tap of claws on the floor. Shadow had risen and was standing now, watching them. His head tilted, tail low but wagging just once. Emily's father looked up and met the dog's gaze. He nodded once. Shadow padded forward, not quickly, but with purpose, and lay down just a few feet away. Not hiding, not retreating, just present. And in that quiet, a new kind of peace settled into the room. They didn't need to say anything else. Everyone understood. Shadow was home now. The days that followed were quiet, almost deceptively so. Shadow had started to heal, not just in body, but in spirit. His steps, though still slow, had more certainty. He no longer lingered in the shadows or flinched at every sound. He slept just inside the kitchen now, curled on the old rug near the stove, where the warmth seemed to settle deep into his tired bones. Emily would sit beside him after school, reading aloud as his head rested on her lap, and sometimes, only sometimes, he would close his eyes and breathe, truly breathe, like he had finally found a place where nothing bad could reach him. Her father had built a small shelter in the yard with his own hands, not because Shadow needed it, but because he wanted to. Quiet acts of care came easily now, unspoken but understood. And in the evenings, the family would sometimes sit outside on the porch, Emily's head against her mother's arm, her father sipping coffee, and Shadow lying just beneath their feet, not guarding, not retreating, simply part of them. A thread in the fabric. But peace, as they would learn, does not stay unchallenged for long. It was a Thursday when the knock came. Late afternoon, the sun dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. Emily was at the table drawing with colored pencils. Her mother was peeling potatoes at the sink. Shadow was by the window, dozing lightly, ears twitching to the rhythm of the world. Then came 3 sharp knocks. Not the kind neighbors used. Not friendly. Not curious. Demanding. Emily's mother paused, her hands still on the peeler. Shadow's eyes snapped open. He stood up slowly, then moved toward the front door with an alertness Emily hadn't seen since the night of the storm. Her mother wiped her hands on a towel and walked cautiously to the door, peering through the small window. She didn't open it right away. "Can I help you?" she called. The man standing on the porch was tall, broad-shouldered, with mud on his boots and a sun-worn face that didn't hold much kindness. His truck, that same dented one Emily had seen days ago, sat rumbling at the edge of the driveway. Even before he spoke, Emily knew. It was him. "Yeah," the man said, voice rough like gravel. "I'm looking for my dog." Her mother's eyes narrowed. "We don't have your dog." The man leaned slightly forward. "Big shepherd. No. Scar on the leg. Looks just like the one in your yard." Emily had come to stand behind her mother now, her small hand curling into the fabric of her mother's shirt. Shadow stood between them, muscles tense, eyes locked on the man outside the door. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just stood like a statue, still but ready. "We've taken in a stray," her mother replied firmly. "He's being cared for. If you have proof of ownership, you can bring it to the sheriff." The man's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Lady, I don't need the sheriff. I need my dog." "No," she said, voice like stone. "What you need to do is leave." The man stared at her for a long moment. Then his eyes shifted to Shadow, and for the first time, Emily saw something flicker across his face. Not recognition. Something worse. Ownership. As if he was looking at something he still believed belonged to him. He stepped down from the porch, walking backwards toward his truck, never taking his eyes off the dog. "I'll be back," he muttered. "And when I come, I won't be asking." The truck roared as he turned and sped down the road, a cloud of dust trailing behind. Her mother slammed the door shut, locked it, and then picked up the phone. Emily watched as she dialed the sheriff's number with steady hands. She spoke clearly, calmly, explained the situation, gave the plate number she had memorized. But Emily wasn't listening to the words anymore. Her eyes were on Shadow. He hadn't moved from the door. His stance was rigid, tail low but stiff. His ears were perked, every sense tuned outward. And most striking of all, the way he kept himself between her and the front of the house. As if he understood, without needing a single command, that danger had come. When her mother hung up, she knelt beside Emily. "He's not getting in this house," she said firmly. "Not for Shadow. Not for you. Not ever." Emily nodded, but her voice wouldn't come. Later that night, they checked every window, locked every door. Her father even pulled out the old shotgun he kept for foxes and leaned it behind the front door. Emily had never seen him like that. Calm, yes, but with an edge in his eyes. As if something had clicked inside him. Some old part that knew what it meant to defend what mattered. Shadow didn't sleep at the kitchen rug that night. He slept beside Emily's bed. Head up, eyes open, still as stone. And Emily, even though she was afraid, reached down and rested her fingers lightly on his back. The warmth there, the steady rise and fall of his breath, reminded her of something powerful. Shadow hadn't just come into their lives needing protection. He had come to protect. The morning after the knock at the door was different. Not because the sky looked unusual or because the wind was stronger than usual, but because there was something unspoken in the air, something just beneath the surface. A tension, a weight. Shadow still hadn't left Emily's side. He lay at the foot of her bed like a silent sentry, eyes alert even when they were closed. And when she rose quietly and tiptoed into the kitchen, he followed, steps soft but watchful, always glancing toward the windows. Emily's parents were already awake. Her mother was making coffee, her father silently moving tools to the shed, checking locks again, walking the perimeter of the yard like a man remembering things he hadn't had to think about in years. No one said the man might return. They didn't need to. Everyone knew he would. Emily sat at the kitchen table, tablet in hand, staring at the blank screen for a long time. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure where to begin. She wasn't allowed to use social media often, only when her mom was nearby, but this time, her mom had nodded. Quietly. "Go ahead," she'd said. "People need to know." So she began to type. She wrote like she was telling a story. Not a cry for help, not an angry letter, but a story about a dog who showed up under their porch during a storm, broken and bleeding. A dog who had flinched at every kindness, who had scars and a silent heart, and a name that seemed to fit without needing to be explained. She wrote about how he slept beside her now, how he watched the door more carefully than anyone else in the house, and how something about him made her feel like maybe, just maybe, they had saved each other. She didn't share everything. Not about the man. Not yet. But she shared enough. She added a photo her mom had taken earlier that week. Shadow lying in the sun by the porch, eyes closed, peaceful in a way that made you want to believe the world could be kind. Then she clicked post. At first, nothing happened. A few likes. A couple of comments. "So sweet. What a beautiful dog. Thank you for taking him in." But then, something shifted. Someone shared it to a bigger group, the town's main community page. Then someone else shared it to a regional rescue network. Within a few hours, the post had dozens of shares. By that night, it had hundreds. People began messaging Emily's mother directly, asking if they could donate supplies, food, medicine. A local vet offered a free full exam. A pet supply store down the road said they'd sponsor anything Shadow needed. People they'd never met stopped by the gate, leaving bags of dog food, chew toys, even blankets with little handwritten notes attached. For the brave boy. Thank you for loving him. He's not alone anymore. But the moment that changed everything came late that evening, when an email arrived in Emily's mother's inbox from someone named Michael Brenner. He was a retired military officer living 3 counties away. The subject line simply read, I know that dog." They opened the email together. Her mother, father, and Emily gathered around the old laptop on the kitchen table while Shadow rested nearby. The message was short, but each line landed like a heartbeat. "I saw your daughter's post. I'm nearly certain that dog is one we rescued last year from a raid on a suspected fighting compound outside of Branton County. We had several animals placed in temporary care afterward. One of them, a male German Shepherd, escaped the site during the confusion. We never found him, but I remember his eyes. I would know them anywhere. Please, thank you for finding him." Emily's mother read the message aloud, voice trembling by the end. Her father stared at the screen for a long moment, then nodded once, the kind of nod a man gives when something finally fits into place. The next day, the local newspaper called. Then the radio. Then a small TV crew from a nearby town. They didn't come for drama. They came for the story, the kind people still wanted to believe in. The story of a broken dog, a brave little girl, and a porch that became something close to a miracle. Emily didn't want attention. She just wanted to protect him. But when the reporter asked her why she did it, why she had crawled out into the storm that night when she could have stayed warm in bed, she answered simply, "Because he was crying." And somehow that was enough. By the end of the week, the sheriff had a full record on the man who'd come to the house. Turns out he had a past. No active charges, but enough shadows trailing behind him to keep the authorities interested. A patrol car now passed by the house twice a day. Emily's father installed motion lights. But most of all, they had people now. A town behind them. Strangers who had become allies. And through it all, Shadow watched. Watched as people left gifts by the gate. Watched as Emily's father stood taller and spoke softer. Watched as Emily curled up next to him with her head on his side, reading her stories as if he understood every word. He didn't wag his tail much. He didn't bark. But his eyes had changed. Not all the way. Not yet. But they had light in them now. A soft, cautious kind of light. The kind that comes when someone begins to believe, slowly, that maybe they're finally safe. That maybe this time, they don't have to run anymore. The night it happened, the air felt different. Still, too still, the kind of quiet that presses against your skin and sinks into your bones. Even the usual rustle of leaves had paused, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. The moon, half hidden behind a thin veil of cloud, bathed the yard in a strange silver glow, enough to see shapes but not their details. It was the kind of night that made the heart beat just a little faster, though you didn't know why. Inside the Langston house, all the lights were off except for the warm lamp in the hallway and a soft glow from the kitchen. Emily was curled under her blanket, her breathing steady, her hand resting gently on the head of the dog beside her bed. Shadow lay still, his body warm and close, ears twitching now and then, alert even in rest. He didn't sleep like a normal dog, not yet. He didn't roll over or stretch out or chase dream rabbits with twitching paws. He stayed half wakeful, a soldier at the edge of peace, listening to the world for signs that something was coming. And something was. It started as the faintest sound. A crunch, light and distant, like a shoe pressing into gravel. Shadow's head lifted immediately, his body freezing mid-breath. His ears rose, rotating like antennas toward the open window. Another crunch. The soft click, metal against metal. The gate. Shadow rose to his feet with slow, deliberate movement, every muscle drawing tight beneath his coat. He padded down the hall without making a sound. Emily stirred, her fingers slipping off his back, but she didn't wake. Shadow moved through the dark like a ghost. At the front window, he stopped. The curtains swayed just slightly from the fan across the room, and through the gap, he saw it. A shadow moving across the lawn. But steady, human. Not the quick, aimless path of someone lost or drunk. This was purposeful, measured. The man had returned. From the top of the stairs, a creak, and then another shape moving. Emily's father stepped into view, already wide awake, already holding the old shotgun. Not raised, just in his hands, resting against his side. His eyes met Shadow's in the faint glow. No words passed between them. None were needed. Then, 3 sharp knocks. Not on the door, but on the wood of the porch railing. Shadow let out one deep, rumbling growl. Not loud, but enough. Emily's father stepped closer to the window and peeked through the curtain. His jaw tightened. It was him. Before he could speak, a flash of light flooded the yard. From the road, a voice rang out, strong and firm. "Sheriff's Department. Step away from the house." The figure outside turned instantly. The flashlight caught his face, pale, angry, not yet afraid, and then he bolted, running toward the edge of the yard. But he didn't make it far. From the trees, another beam of light. Then footsteps. A second officer emerged, cutting off his escape. The man skidded, slipped in the gravel, and was on the ground within seconds, hands behind his back, curses spilling out of his mouth like spit. Red and blue lights blinked to life down the road as a third cruiser rolled in, silent until now, headlights off but presence heavy. The yard lit up in ghostly color. Emily, now awake and wrapped in her blanket, had crept to the front window. She stood beside her father, not speaking, just watching. Shadow sat in front of her, alert but calm, eyes never leaving the man on the ground. He didn't bark. He didn't charge. He didn't need to. The danger was already being taken away. One of the deputies walked up the porch steps, flashlight low out of respect. Emily's mother appeared behind them now, robe tied hastily, worry in her eyes but not fear, not this time. "We've had him under quiet surveillance since your daughter's post," the deputy explained. There were already whispers, connections to illegal dog rings. But when the story spread, witnesses came forward. And then we had enough to act. We caught him trying to enter your property with a pair of bolt cutters and gloves. He paused, then looked down at Shadow. "You're lucky," he said softly. "That dog, that's not just a survivor. That's a protector." Emily looked at Shadow and realized just how true those words were. When the deputies loaded the man into the cruiser, he didn't go quietly. He shouted, twisted in the seat, eyes wild with something ugly. "You can't prove nothing," he yelled. "That's my dog. You'll pay for this. All of you." But the words felt weightless now. No one responded. Not even Shadow. He just stood at the edge of the porch, eyes steady, tail still. Emily walked over and knelt beside him, resting her hand on his back. "You did good," she whispered. "You didn't let him take you again." The cruiser pulled away, taillights glowing red in the distance until they disappeared over the hill. The other officers spoke briefly with Emily's father, made sure everything was clear, and offered to send a follow-up report in the morning. Then they too rolled away, and the night returned to its strange, heavy stillness. Only now, it felt different. It felt safe. Back inside, the family sat in the living room for a while, no one saying much. Shadow lay at Emily's feet, his breathing slow, his eyes beginning to close. The muscles in his body were loose now. His ears drooped just slightly. And for the first time since the night he arrived, he looked at ease. Emily's mother ran her fingers gently through his fur, then looked at her daughter. "He stood between you and that man," she said quietly. "Not because he was told to, because he chose to." Emily nodded, her voice soft. "Because we chose him first." They all sat there for a while longer, letting the night settle around them like a warm blanket, the sound of Shadow's breath filling the space between their words. And as they turned off the lights and climbed the stairs to bed, Shadow followed Emily up without a sound. When she curled beneath her covers, he lay at the foot of her bed, paws crossed, eyes half-lidded. And for the first time in a very long time, he slept deeply. No tension in his back, no fear in his breath, only peace, because the past had finally let go of him. And now, he was free. The story didn't end the night the sheriff took the man away. In some ways, that was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, the house on the edge of Willow Creek slowly transformed, not in structure, but in spirit. The fear that had once pressed against its walls was gone. The locks still clicked shut at night, and the motion lights still flickered on when a raccoon passed too close to the fence, but now those things felt like routine, not defense. There was peace here now, a kind of quiet that made you feel safe instead of small. Shadow changed too. Not all at once. Not in some magical, overnight way. Healing didn't work like that, not for people and not for dogs. But each day, something softened in him. His eyes, once dark and watchful, now held a flicker of something gentler. Curiosity, maybe even joy. He had stopped sleeping with one eye open. Stopped jolting awake at every creak in the floorboards. He still slept beside Emily's bed, paws stretched out, ears twitching in dreams. But now, sometimes, he would roll onto his side, belly exposed, legs in the air like a puppy who had never known pain. It made Emily laugh every time. And when she laughed, Shadow's tail would thump softly against the rug. News of what had happened spread fast through the town, not because of gossip, but because people were hungry for something real, something hopeful. Emily's story, and Shadow's too, made its way from the local paper to radio stations and blogs. People started sharing their own rescue stories in return. Photos of adopted dogs and teary reunions filled message boards. Shelters that had once been overlooked were suddenly flooded with visitors, not just to adopt, but to volunteer, to donate, to ask what they could do. Something about Shadow's eyes, and Emily's words, had touched something deep in people. It reminded them that broken things could be mended, that the ones left behind weren't always meant to be forgotten, and that sometimes it only takes one act of kindness to turn a life around. At Emily's school, they held an assembly, not for grades or trophies or ribbons, but for bravery. Her principal called her name in front of the entire gymnasium and told the story of a girl who had crawled out into a storm with nothing but a flashlight and a kind heart. Shadow was there too, of course, sitting calmly by her side, wearing a red bandana someone had donated, his scars still visible, but his posture proud. When Emily stepped forward to accept a small plaque, the entire room stood to clap. But Emily didn't take the credit. She pointed to Shadow. "I didn't save him," she said, her voice echoing through the mic. "We saved each other." After that, the Langstons began getting letters. Handwritten notes, some with shaky penmanship from people in nursing homes, others drawn in crayon by kids who had never seen a dog in real life. Some were simple, "Thank you." Others told long, tearful stories of their own animals. The ones who stayed when others didn't, the ones who listened when the world felt too loud. And then, something unexpected happened. One letter came from a veterans center 2 towns over. The director had read about Emily's father, about the dog he had lost overseas, and the one who had helped him heal. She asked if he might consider coming to visit. Just to talk. Just to bring Shadow along. Just to see if maybe their presence could help someone else. At first, Emily's father hesitated. He wasn't the kind of man who sought attention. But something about the idea lingered. And one quiet Thursday morning, he loaded Shadow into the truck and drove to the center. When he came home that evening, his eyes were red, but his voice was lighter than it had been in years. "They want us to come back," he said. "Turns out, there's a few more guys like me who could use a good dog." It became part of their lives after that. Twice a month, he and Shadow would visit the center. Sometimes they'd just sit with the men and women there, Shadow resting his head in someone's lap, listening without judgment. Other times, they talk. About loss. About fear. About the way some scars didn't show on the outside. Shadow, it seemed, knew how to carry those stories without saying a word. Back home, Emily still read to him every night. The books changed, her voice grew more confident, but the ritual stayed the same. She'd sit cross-legged with a blanket draped over her shoulders, Shadow curled beside her, listening like the words mattered more than she'd ever know. And sometimes, when she finished reading, she'd look at him and say softly, "You're not the same dog I found that night." But Shadow would only blink, then rest his head in her lap, as if to say, "Neither are you." Because it was true. Emily wasn't just the little girl who had gone into the storm anymore. She was someone who had learned what courage felt like. Someone who had seen pain and hadn't run from it. And now, everywhere she went, she carried that with her. In her walk. In her voice. In the quiet confidence that only comes from having done something that mattered. And Shadow? Shadow was no longer just a survivor. He was family. Not the kind who shared your last name or sat at the dinner table, though he did sometimes get a taste of roasted chicken on Sundays. No, Shadow was the kind of family you earn. The kind that chooses you back. The kind whose love doesn't need words, because it's spoken in silence, in presence, in the way he followed her from room to room just to be close. And when the nights grew quiet again, and the wind passed gently through the trees outside, Emily would lie in bed and listen to the steady rhythm of Shadow's breath beside her. Not as a stranger, not as a burden, but as a heartbeat that had found its home. Years had passed. The little farmhouse where the story began still stood, tucked at the edge of a sleepy town, where the wind still carried the scent of pine and old rain. The porch swing now had newer cushions, and Emily had painted it sky blue one spring. The old boards still creaked in the same places, but now their sound was familiar, like an old song hummed gently over the years. Inside, everything felt slower, warmer. The chaos that once surrounded the home had long since faded, replaced with a quiet joy that came from the kind of peace you have to fight to earn. In the living room, Emily, now in her early 20s, sat cross-legged on the rug, an old photo album in her lap. Her hair was still long, still braided, but she carried herself differently now, with the steadiness of someone who had lived through something that left her both softer and stronger. A small camera was set up across from her, the kind used to capture interviews or stories worth saving. But Emily didn't speak like she was performing. She just talked, like the camera wasn't even there. She turned a page and let her fingers rest on an old photo. It was her, barely 8 years old, crouched under the porch, flashlight in hand, eyes wide. Beside her, half hidden in shadow, was a frightened, battered German shepherd with sad eyes. "This was the night everything changed," she said quietly. "I thought I was saving a dog. But really, he was saving me." Her voice cracked a little on the last word, and she paused. Her fingers gently traced the shape of Shadow's body in the photo. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just looked at me, like he already knew who I was. She turned the next page. There were more photos now, dozens over the years. Shadow lying on her bed, head on her feet. Shadow walking at the veteran's center beside her father. Shadow surrounded by children in a classroom, wearing a red bandana someone had sent in the mail. Shadow next to a sheriff's badge the day the town declared him an honorary guardian. "He never needed a leash," she smiled softly. "He followed me because he wanted to. He stayed because he chose to." Just then, the living room door creaked open, and a little boy tiptoed in. Emily turned. "Hey, Jonah," she said gently. The 5-year-old crossed the room and climbed into her lap, looking at the photo album curiously. "Is that really Shadow?" he asked, pointing to a picture of the younger dog. Emily nodded. "That's him. A long time ago. He was a lot faster back then. Did he really fight a bad guy? He didn't have to fight, she replied. He just stood between me and the dark. And sometimes that's all it takes. Jonah was quiet for a moment. Where is he now? Emily closed the album and stood, holding Jonah's hand. He's waiting for us. Want to come? The two of them stepped outside into the soft light of early evening. The sun was starting to sink behind the distant trees, casting a golden wash across the tall grass in the field behind the house. And there, waiting near the fence, was Shadow. He was older now, his fur grayed around the muzzle, eyes a little clouded, movements slower. One of his hind legs dragged ever so slightly, the result of old injuries and time catching up. But when he saw Emily, he lifted his head, his ears perked, and his tail gave a slow, steady wag. Emily let Jonah run ahead while she walked slowly toward the hill. Shadow met her halfway. She reached down, brushing her fingers gently through his coarse fur, and he leaned into her side like he always had. "Still got some miles left in you, huh?" she whispered. They walked together, just like they had so many times before, side by side through the tall grass. The same hill where Shadow had once stood guard over her was now their favorite place, a place of quiet reflection and wordless love. At the top, Emily sat in the grass, legs stretched out in front of her. Shadow lowered himself slowly beside her, resting his head on her knee. Jonah played with a stick nearby, occasionally glancing back at them. "You know," Emily said softly to Shadow, "I used to think I found you by accident, that you were just there hiding from a storm. But now I think maybe I was the one hiding. And you found me." She looked out at the horizon, her eyes misting with memory. "There were nights I couldn't sleep unless I heard you breathing next to me. Days I only felt brave because I knew you were watching." She glanced down at him. His breathing was slower now, heavier. But his eyes never left hers. "You changed all of us," she continued. "Dad talks now about things he never could before. He says you gave him back parts of himself. And Mom, she leaves the back door open now, just a little, like she's waiting for someone to come in out of the rain." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of faded red cloth, Shadow's first bandana. Tying it gently around his neck, she whispered, "You were never just a pet. You were my home." As the wind whispered through the trees, Shadow blinked slowly, then closed his eyes and let out a long breath. Not a tired one, a peaceful one. Jonah wandered back, curling into Emily's side. "Can he stay with us forever?" he asked. Emily wrapped her arm around the boy, holding him close. "He already has," she whispered, "in all the best ways." The three of them sat there as the sky faded into deeper shades of amber and lavender. A hush settled over the field. The world had grown quiet again, not in fear, but in peace. And as the screen began to fade to black, Emily's voice returned one last time. "For anyone who's ever been saved by what they thought they were saving, this was our story.